Welcome to Lesson 2 in the ASP.NET MVC UI add-on course. In this lesson, we're going to add the actual MVC application to our Tournament Tracker solution. So here I have Tournament Tracker open, and it's just like it is when we left off after the last lesson of the main course. There's one little modification. You'll notice the red check mark down here if your eyes are good. In the app.config, I actually moved my database over to my primary server. And so since Tournament Tracker ended, I actually got rid of my sub SQL server, and now I'm just running just the one. So that's the only difference. It shouldn't affect you at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a new project to the solution. So currently we have the tracker library, which is where all of our business logic and our data access code lives. And then we have the tracker UI, and that currently is a WinForm application. I'm not going to delete that. I'm not going to get rid of it. Instead, I'll just add a new user interface, and we'll call this our ASP.NET user interface or something like that. But I don't want to get rid of this because I want to still have, first of all, the ability to open these up and look at them and say, okay, that's what the user interface looks like in the WinForm side. Now how we translate that into the web side. So that's a really big benefit. The other benefit is that there's no reason to get rid of it. We can still have both working in conjunction with each other in order to have an even better application, because we have two different ways of accessing it. And so we'll keep that project as well. So let's right-click on our solution and say we want to add new project. And this is important here. We've gone over it before, but I want to make sure we cover it again. Make sure you're in the Visual C# section. Don't wander off into the Visual Basic or other sections. And if you do a search for ASP.NET, like so, you'll find, first of all, a lot of different options. But also note, and I'll expand this a little bit, we have a couple that are for Visual Basic. And so I don't want you to get tripped up in finding those instead and accidentally going off on a different path. I also don't want you to get into the .NET Core, so no core web applications. And so the easiest thing to do is go to Visual C# instead of searching, Visual C# Web. And here's three options. The first one is the one you want, the ASP.NET Web Application in the .NET Framework. That's the one you want, not the other two. So we'll select that for now, and we'll call this the MVC UI. We'll have it all caps because it's all just one big it's actually two different acronyms. So the Model View Controller User Interface is what it stands for. And we'll hit OK. Now, we get this box, and because of my font size for demonstration purposes, this is all messed up. And I've actually got a ticket into Microsoft. They're saying they're going to fix this in a future release. But for now, what we can do is just expand this box and make it usable. So we're going to select MVC. That's the framework you want. And down here under the checkboxes, you'll notice Web Forms, MVC, and Web API. Only MVC is checked. And we're going to leave it like that. We don't want to have the Web Forms, and in this video, we're not going to cover the Web API. So that'll be a different series. We'll probably not do it necessarily for Tournament Tracker, at least not yet. But Web API is a little bit of a different animal. And so we'll cover that in a later series of videos. Finally, we're not going to add unit tests. There's a couple reasons for this. The simplest one is that I try really hard not to cover multiple topics in one video. I try and not lose you in learning 5, 6, 7 different things at once. And so that's one reason. Another reason is this is a user interface. And while user interfaces are testable to an extent, I find, first of all, it's a very much a diminishing return on your investment. It takes an awful lot of time, and you don't get back nearly as much as what I find is valuable. And also, it's much more difficult. And so we're not going to do unit tests in this project. So just MVC down here, no authentication over here. The original Tournament Tracker library and Tournament Tracker user interface, they didn't handle authentication. And so in keeping with it works the same way, we're not going to add authentication. Now what that means is this wouldn't be an application you put on the web, which may sound silly for a web application, but this would be much more suited for an internal application. So say you spool up a small little web server at your company or at your house, and you just use it for the people on your local network. And so it's more of a, we trust you to do the right thing. This is just a fun little application to build tournaments. Now, if you wanted to, you could add authentication. It's just you'll need to do a little more work to make sure that authentication goes all the way through. And so again, we're not going to cover that in this video. We'll have future videos where we do cover authentication, but not in this course. All right. So MVC, down here is just MVC, no authentication, hit OK. And I've covered it before, but down here in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see all the NuGet projects being added to our MVC application. And that's, if we go back to references and say manage NuGet packages, you'll see if we were to go to installed, there's a number of NuGet packages that are here. Now, the first thing that freaks people out is how many packages that are here. But what's happened is Microsoft has said we don't want to create a template where we built everything. And the reason for that is because they have to maintain everything, and they may not have the best idea of what this template needs to do for every situation. In fact, I'm sure they don't. And so what they said is we're going to create a modular template where if you don't want to use jQuery, and I know some people hate jQuery, and that's, I think, unfounded, but there is that crowd. Well, you know what? Remove it. You may lose a little bit of functionality in the demos Microsoft has created, but as far as the actual application goes, it's not a problem to remove a thing like jQuery. Now, there's other things like the insights, application insights. They can be good for debugging. Razor is actually a really important part of MVC. But again, if you really want to remove it, you could, but we're definitely not going to remove that. So just so you know, this is modular. You can remove stuff. It's not going to break MVC necessarily. Now, in a previous video, I covered MVC, and I said, well, be very careful about doing this upgrade. There's a whole bunch of updates here. There's 17 of them. Just be careful not to just say update all. And that applies more to an installation that's already in production, meaning you've already started using it, or you've built an awful lot of code, and now you say update all. And that's a little dangerous because there may be some breaking changes. And in that case, you need to make sure that your packages are tested. So you do the update, and if it doesn't work, you roll it back, and you go to the next package and do the same thing. But when you're starting out fresh, it's a great time. Check the box that says select all packages, which is, I got 17 updates to do, and say update. And what this will do is it'll bring all my packages up to speed. For example, Bootstrap is at version 3.0.0 currently, but the latest stable release for me is 3.3.7. They have not yet finalized the 4.0 for production release. This does not include pre-release packages. So I have to review the changes for this. Here's the updates. It's saying, do you want to do this? And yes, I do, so I hit OK. I have to accept the terms. And now it's going to put the new packages in. And usually it takes a couple minutes, maybe a little less, and it updates all your packages to the latest version. Now again, it's done now, and I shouldn't have any problems with that because I'm just starting out. I haven't started creating any reliances on these packages yet. So they should just work right out of the box. So we added the MVC UI project to our solution. and now we've updated all the packages to their latest version. We'll leave them all in for now. I'm not going to take any of them out. I did mention that some people are down in jQuery. I'm not really in agreement in that. And I want to explain a little bit of why. jQuery is an amazing library. What it allows us to do, it initially allowed us to have a common way of doing certain tasks across all the different browsers. Now, in the recent years, the browsers have been coming together better and following a standard better so that JavaScript works pretty much the same across all the different platforms. And so that part of jQuery isn't necessarily as needed. The other thing jQuery does is it allows us to have very easy JavaScript. It allows us to do things like, select an item very easily or select a class. So anything that has that class very easily. And it allows it to do certain tasks easily. And so for that, jQuery is amazing. The reason why a lot of people don't like jQuery is because of how much it's abused, not used. And so what happens is people start relying on jQuery and they forget how to do things in direct JavaScript. And so they end up relying on this crutch of jQuery. And that's not what the jQuery library is for. And it really is an abuse of the library. And so some people get a little uptight about jQuery because they see the abuse. But there is good to it as well. And so I just want to kind of point that out. I want to make sure that you don't throw the baby out the bathwater, that there is benefit to jQuery, there is benefit to using it, to having it in place. It's just that you don't want to abuse it. And so that's my take on this. Like I said, though, this video won't really cover JavaScript at all because that's a whole nother animal. Like I said, with jQuery, it's easy to abuse it. You might even know you're abusing it. And so that's where it's going to take a whole lot of videos to even cover what good best practices are on JavaScript and what best practices are with jQuery and how to use them and how to take advantage of the benefits without stepping in the traps. So we're not going to use jQuery, but we'll leave it in place because we'll actually use a little bit of the validation even though we're not actually calling JavaScript. And so I'll show you how to do that. All right, so we've installed the project into our solution and we have set up our NuGet packages and made sure they're updated. The next thing we want to do is make sure we have this set as our startup project. If I were to hit play right now, it would actually launch the tracker UI and this MVC application wouldn't even run. Instead, I right click on the project. I come down here to the set as startup project. It's kind of in the middle of my list. And now this is bolded. Notice it's bold compared to these other two projects. And that just indicates that this project is the startup project. Now, typically, you only have one project set as startup. But if you really wanted to, say for debugging purposes, you could set both the MVC and the WinForm application to both start on debug. It's a little confusing, a little hard to use, and it's not something I cover here as far as using it. But if you want to do that, right-click on your solution, go to Properties, and instead of single startup project, you could select multiple startup projects. And so you'd say, start the MVC UI and start the tracker UI. You could even say start without debugging. And what that will do is it will debug this one, but this one just runs. And that's all it does. It doesn't actually have debugging attached. top of each other underneath the this well right here, it's called. But instead, I could drag this out and make it a little bigger, and now I have 3 columns underneath my well. And so this is our startup page. We have our application name, we have our home, we have an about page, we have a contact page, and that's pretty much all the application is right now. But we're going to make some changes on that pretty shortly. But for now, that's it for this video. What I'd like you to do is follow along with me. So go ahead and do this as well on your machine and just try it out. Just make sure that it runs, make sure that you're comfortable with how it looks, make sure that you've updated all of your NuGet packages, and that you're all set for the next video. In the next video, we're going to actually improve this basic standard look of our application. Nothing like earth-shattering, but I'll show you a quick tip on how to make sure that your application has a little bit different feel for over the default. All right, so stay tuned for that video.